Welcome to the Movie Geeks United 30th anniversary celebration of Howard the Duck. For this episode, we've combed through the archives of our siblings show Back by Midnight, and courtesy of host Arenata Diaz, we bring you an interview with the film's director, Williard Huyck, and his wife and collaborator, as well as the writer of the film, Gloria Katz.
It is sometimes said that a good test for a relationship is to go on a cross-country trip. The theory, I guess, is that if you can survive a high-pressure situation like that, then you're compatible. In Hollywood, a good test for a collaborative relationship isn't the successes, but when a movie gets labeled as troubled by the press and critics. The August 1st, 1986 release of Howard the Duck has become one of the most famous examples of this theory. From the husband and wife team of Williard Huyck and Gloria Katz, he directs, they both write and produce, Howard the Duck is at once a case study, a cautionary tale, and an instant cult item. Adapted from Steve Gerber's 1970s satirical Marvel comics, Howard the Duck is a punk rock sci-fi action comedy intended for the entire family. It's brought to you as a George Lucas presentation, no less. The result was a smart-aleck grunge comedy with high-scale action sequences that was greeted by some of the most hostile reviews of the decade. From its sex-tinged humor to its over-the-top creature effects, courtesy of Phil Tippett, to a pre-Bull Durham Tim Robbins, to a score combining the talents of John Barry and Thomas Dolby, Howard the Duck has become a cult item amongst the HBO generation and followers of fringe filmmaking. Now, Howard the Duck has finally come home to DVD. Joining us to discuss the movie is both Williard Huyck and Gloria Katz. They've been partners in life and movies for nearly 40 years, and their association with George Lucas has also been nearly that long. With American Graffiti, they helped create the template for movies about nostalgia and remembrances. With Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, they not only wrote the best of the Indiana Jones movies, but one of the greatest action movies of all time. Other credits include such films as Lucky Lady, Best Defense, the innovative but little-seen Radioland Murders, and the little-known comic gem French Postcards. It is my pleasure to welcome husband and wife team Williard Huyck and Gloria Katz. Why don't we start at the beginning, and maybe I'll ask ladies first. And where did y'all first? How did y'all first meet?
We actually met at a screening of Roger Corman's Wild Angels. I had just been working all night on editing my student film, A Date with Barbie and Ken. Those were the Barbie and Ken dolls. And right. I sat next to, there was only one seat left in the screening hall, and I happened to sit next to Williard.
Oh.
And I had come across town. He was Roger Corman was showing the film at UCLA, and I was at SC. Mm-hmm. So I actually drove across town to see it. Roger Corman was already a god. He was still in his 30s, but he had made I don't know how many movies.
Right.
And Gloria had just returned from Europe and had on the first miniskirt I ever saw, so I immediately fell in love.
Okay. And I'm just curious, at what point does George Lucas into this collaborative partnership?
Well, actually, at that point, I was in film school with George at SC, and so we were already friends. And some years later, George kept telling us about this comic book that he wanted to do, and we were having lunch in Studio City, and there happened to be a comic book store next door. And he said, "Come on, well, I'll show you." And so he showed us the Howard the Duck comic books, and we started talking about doing it as a movie.
So we started talking about this movie maybe in 1972, and for years we sort of tried to get the rights, but the rights were always taken. And then finally, I guess in 85 or 84, we finally got the rights. And then we sort of, there wasn't a real lot of reasons for people to do this movie, so we finally decided to talk to George about it, and George decided, well, he had always been interested in this project, and we could sort of do it together.
In those early stages of the Howard the Duck adaptation, what was the idea behind it? Because the comics were very satirical and very they were at once satirical and at once very broad, and they had these outlandish superhero kind of send-ups, if you will, and then these satirical jabs at conventions of comic books and at social mores, if you will. And so was that, when the first talks were underway, was it to, let's try to do something real, dark and adult, or let's try to see if we can straddle the dark and adult and with the and maybe something a little more, mainstream / family friendly, if you will?
Well, that was always a problem. I mean, we actually tried to maintain the tone of the comic books, although we couldn't, maintain all the stories and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an odd duck in that it wasn't really a family film, and it had, even though it had broad sort of goofy comedy, it wasn't really for kids, and things like the sex scene and so forth were odd. And, we were always, it didn't really fit. I think that's part of the reason people didn't know how to take the film.
And let's talk about this head on, because you say, because the sex change thing is kind of interesting. And as I played the trailer earlier, I love the line, his pastimes are cigars and sex, which is a great line for the voiceover. And was there an attempt, why don't we try doing, an R or a PG-13? Was it just the way it came out that, it wound up being PG, even though there was this innuendo all throughout the film?
Yeah, I don't think there was any attempt to make it, dumb it down to be a kid's film. I mean, I think that's the tone we liked. We really didn't have any problems until they decided to release it after the film hadn't been successful, and they had releases like on airplanes, They said, could you take the sex scene out, and sort of said, listen, we haven't made a nickel on this movie yet, so give us a break.
Right.
So on the airplane they didn't have the sex scene. But no, I mean, it was more of a question of, us sort of straddling tones rather than trying to get any kind of particular rating.
Well, and let's go back a little to that pre-production period, and let's just talk about this concept of this duck. I had read, in fact, actually, I think Jeffrey Jones told me this once, that at one point he said this was early on, there was talk or even maybe a suggestion that maybe this was going to be the first Pixar film.
Actually, we had talked about animating it, but we didn't have the lead time to really animate it. You need, several years, and Universal needed a product out by, the next summer. So we had to sort of go with the animatronics.
Mm-hmm.
George really, at that point, the only thing like that, Roger Rabbit was animated, but George didn't want to do that kind of movie. I mean, they did that later. But he was, they had used puppets, and he was used to, animatronics and things. And it was really not, I mean, the way you would do it now, obviously, is CG, and there wasn't, that was just in the beginning. When we tried to take out some wires, when Howard is blasting off of his planet, he blasts through walls and blasts through this little lady duck's bathroom and so forth. There were wires, and to take that out on a computer was a huge deal, very expensive, and it took forever. And, nowadays it's nothing. So that was our only other choice, and we decided to go with puppets, a combination of puppets, little people, and animatronics. Was
there ever discussion of something like, with Coraline, something with stop motion, or would that also be too time-consuming?
Well, that would be time consuming as far as Howard. I mean, the monster was stop motion. Phil Tippett's work was stop motion.
Mm-hmm.
It would take forever to have Howard to have been stop motion and to talk and to do as much action and things.
Right. Well, let's talk about the story. What were some of the plot elements when y'all were putting the script together? Because obviously, the character played by Leah Thompson, Beverly Switchler, that is from the comic book. But I believe in the comic she's a model. But in here she's a punk rocker, kind of, I guess, sort of a cross between the Go-Go's and the Runaways.
We just thought that was sort of more fun and contemporary at the time than a model. It seemed a little old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
What really happened is our first script we didn't get into at all, which was our original concept and George's idea of how Howard even got here. The original idea was to have Howard in a movie and not sort of explain why the way he was. And so it was set in Hawaii. And, we wrote the whole thing, and the studio finally said, this is too strange. I mean, you've got to sort of explain what in the hell's going on and why he's here. So then we went back and incorporated things from the comics of his backstory and why he ended up in Cleveland.
Let's talk about the voice of Howard. The voice of Howard is provided by Chip Zien. I believe that's how you pronounce his name?
It's Chip Zien. Chip Zien is a really well-known Broadway actor.
Yeah.
He's been in many of the Steve Sondheim, James Lapine Broadway musicals. He was the lead in Into the Woods. I did a lot of voice casting at that time, and it went on for months and months of trying to find the appropriate voice, and we just really felt, well, first of all, Chip is a really good actor, and Willard spent weeks and weeks with him in a dark room. He was very easy to work with, and we just thought he had the right voice for the character.
We had everybody in the world who wanted to do the voice. I mean, it became sort of a thing that people said, I'll fly up to San Francisco, it'll be fun, I'll meet George and see Lucasfilm, so we had all the comics, from Robin Williams to everybody who was successful in those days.
Was there pressure from the studio of getting a name voice?
No, they actually, that was even before they sort of had names doing animated films. That came later. I mean, our feeling was a lot of the times, somebody like Robin Williams, who was brilliant, but we had a script, and eventually the voice was going to be put in after the film was shot.
Mm-hmm.
So Robin would go off on these riffs, which were great, but unfortunately the film was shot. So, I mean, it wasn't going to work. And then we also felt that a lot of the actors with very, very recognizable voices weren't working because you immediately thought of their personas and so forth.
And
Chip had a very distinctive voice that came through, and it was really like blind tasting tests. We would have no idea who the person was, and we'd listen to the takes, and we selected him.
And I'll say this, for whatever people may think of the film, I do think Chip Zien is a great voice. It's a very smart-ass voice, but a very authoritative voice, and I think it's a terrific voice performance.
It is, and we were very, very pleased with his performance, and we thought the same thing. It was a very distinctive voice.
Well, I got to ask this because you said it's all done in post. The voice, so on a technical level, so there's scenes with Leah Thompson, Jeffrey Jones, and Tim Robbins, and everyone's interacting with the Howard the Duck puppet or whatever. So is there a script supervisor off camera reading the lines for marks, or is it audio taped, or?
Actually, what we did is the puppeteer, the lead puppeteer, most of the time would be talking, and while he was running a little, game console and moving the lips and so forth, he would do the talking.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the script supervisor would read lines, but most of the time it was he sort of did the talking as they moved the lips, because even when the little people were in we had this duck head that they put on. It was full of gears and little motors, and those would be operated by a panel of 4 people. Mm-hmm. Somebody be doing the eyes, somebody be doing the mouth, as this sort of little person in an iron mask was acting. So it was always the lead, the guy doing the mouth, is what we heard on the tracks until we finally started laying in the chips line.
Right. Well, and I got to ask about this cast because, as I stated before, but in my intro, this is 2 years before Bull Durham, and you have Tim Robbins. So what was that casting process? I'm sure George Lucas's name is attached to this, so I'm sure you had a lot of actors who came in, but Tim Robbins wasn't a known entity, and Jeffrey Jones he was a stage actor, but he had some heat coming off of Amadeus. So what was those casting sessions like for some of these key roles?
Well, we had a really good casting person, Diane Crittenden, and she brought in Tim. And when she brought in Tim did a spectacular reading, and he was really, really inventive.
I mean, people like Diane Crittenden are aware of, Tim had made sort of a splash at UCLA Theater Department.
Right.
And so people were aware of him as a young actor. And we were aware of Jeffrey Jones. So casting people, really stay on top of what's happening and people on their way up.
But, when you're reading a lot of people, both Jeffrey and Tim are so exceptional that you immediately know when somebody is extraordinarily talented.
I mean, when we did this movie, French Postcards, we had the same thing. Tim Robbins had come in and just did a great reading, and Mandy Patinkin had a very small part in
Deborah Winger. People don't know that.
It was the same thing. I mean, there was some notice by casting people who keep track. It's like baseball, they keep track of the people coming up, and you have to take a chance on them. And normally in those roles, in maybe more in those days, you weren't looking for established people anyway.
And I guess the co-lead is Leah Thompson. Now I've read other people, some of the people who auditioned. I think Belinda Carlisle came in. Was a singing component optional or preferable, or was that just a bonus when you were auditioning?
It was just a bonus. I mean, yeah, we had. We talked about a few singers, and then we felt, in the readings and so forth, that the acting was the most important part. And, Leah was fantastic, and Tom Dolby took Leah and the other 3 girls and really made them, come up across as a pretty good rock group.
That's another thing, the behind-the-scenes credits. I mean, you have a score put together not only by Thomas Dolby, who does the songs and so forth, but John Barry. These 2 guys working together. And
that was an odd mix.
I can only imagine, because you have this, you have a regular score that's for kind of like an adventure film, and then you have these kind of in the middle of all that, you have these very pop punk songs, kind of bumping up against each other.
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, we had we did a lot of different kinds of music, and that it was interesting from a production point of view.
I got to ask, was there always going to be a title song, or was that just something that came through these sessions of creating these songs for the movie?
Well, I don't know if we always thought of a title song, but we knew at the end that Howard was going to be singing. And I think that Tom came to us, and he actually worked with George Clinton on this funky song that was titled Howard the Duck. And we said, that'd be great, and if you could get a song out of Howard the Duck and rhyme it with things, I mean, that would be great. So,
rhyme it and keep it clean.
Yes, keep it clean. There's not a lot you can, but... it was fun. We liked the song.
And in case our listeners don't know, and I don't even know if you all know this, but the actual Howard the Duck music video is on YouTube, which is a real fun thing to see, which has a preamble of Howard and Tim Robbins before the music video. Did you direct that? Or
no, actually Tom directed that. It's a very funny bit.
And then, like I said, Phil Tippett, the cinematographer Richard Klein. I mean
it's interesting. We mixed a lot of sort of off-the-wall choices with people like Richard Klein, who has made a lot of movies. Right. But again, because there were we knew we'd be doing a lot of special effects. We wanted somebody who had done that before and knew what ILM needed.
Right.
And of course, Phil was the master. I mean, Phil was a god.
And so.
Oh, we had one other extraordinary person, Ben Burt, who did the voice of the monster at the end, and is now the voice of Wall-E.
Yes, the monster of Howard the Duck has become Wall-E.
That is on his resume. You do the film. You finish principal photography, and you're into post-production, and you're dealing with effects and getting the voice in and so forth. But this film became very famous. Was there a moment where you thought, is there a moment in the post-production process where you think, I don't think some people might not get this?
Oh yes, there was that, but there was that feeling from the beginning that we weren't really sure whether people would get it. George had this sort of attitude; he didn't care. George still loves the movie. I mean, George's take on the movie has always been, I like it, and he calls all the time. He'll say, I was thinking the other day, if you looked at Teenage Mutant Ninja, and you looked at Howard the Duck and said, which one was the hit? You'd have to say Howard the Duck, because he said the other film's really awful. He's always liked it. Maybe George's stubbornness has sort of affected the project. But I think the idea of Howard the Duck, the title, there were problems using little people in suits.
Right.
We certainly had a lot of technical problems because of that, and I think that George was sort of a big target.
Well,
and people, for whatever reason, didn't like the movie. But during post-production actually was fun because there were so many production problems. I mean, the first day we shot with Howard, they opened his mouth and suddenly his neck exploded and all the innards, all the mechanical stuff were exposed, and everybody just sat there in silence. What are we going to do?
This is in this summer. It's funny, you don't know what kind of summer you're going into until you're in the midst of it. But you have that date. That's where you plant your flag. But the summer of '86 is a pretty remarkable summer in film history. This is the summer of Top Gun, of Aliens, of The Fly. There's Ferris Bueller, and so there was just this one kind of pop culture film after another. And Howard the Duck was one of those films. So I'm curious on that opening weekend. We all know the story that Mr. Lucas goes away for the opening weekend. What did you all do that opening weekend?
Well, I think we were considering going to Iceland.
We did nothing. I mean, sort of beforehand with your previews that you're in big trouble. Mm-hmm. I mean, the studios unfortunately know, the week before it opens, and that affects your advertising budget. Mm-hmm. And once your ads get cut, you become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't remember where we went.
I don't think we were trying to think of where we'd go, and we just sort of stayed home, assuming that we wouldn't be bothered because nobody would be calling us, which was great. It was very quiet. And I remember, and as I said at the beginning, this is an item of the HBO generation, of the VHS generation, and I was a kid of the 80s. I was 8 years old in 1986, and I remember vividly when this film came out on VHS. I guess at some point early of 1987, and it seemed to, and even though the tone had a lot of innuendo and so forth, and was not geared towards children. Were you surprised? And when did you start realizing that actually this film is actually a hit with kids? Kids are renting this thing. Yeah, well, you start hearing a small undercurrent of when little people, younger people, start saying, "I like this." That there, it wasn't quite the universal disaster that it was made out to be, but
the only reason I realized people were looking at the film was because on Amazon.com, all of a sudden I saw its rating, and I said, "How could this be?"
A lot of people
a lot of people bought the video, and so then when they approached us that they were doing a little documentary on the film, it must have been because people were watching the video.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been that a lot of people watched the video because so few people saw it in its original release.
Mm-hmm. And here's an obvious question. Remakes are always popular. Has anyone ever even uttered the technology? Has anyone ever uttered maybe we could do it again and quote unquote do it properly?
Not yet. Although it seems to be going in that direction. They come up with the strangest movies to remake. Nobody has really approached us yet about doing Howard the Duck or a sequel or a prequel. But
do you have? Let me ask
maybe we'll do a musical.
Well, let me ask you this, and you don't have to say any details, but like in the back of your head, do you have an idea of like, if they were to ask me, I think I know what I could do that they might like. Do you have that in the back of your head?
Yeah, I think the idea would be suicide. I think somebody said we were going to do it again. But no, I mean we do have a script that takes place in Hawaii, but no, we really haven't thought about it that much.
Well, if you do, please come back. Well, and before I let you go, I got to ask about, as I stated, Temple of Doom. I got to ask a Temple of Doom question because it is my favorite of the Indiana Jones films, and I do stand fast by my claim. I do think it's one of the greatest action movies ever made, and
thank you.
I think it's remarkable. At the time, yes, it was a follow up to the one or two of the biggest grossing film of all time, and it was going to be a summer film, so you knew it was going to be a hit, but and everyone went, but there was this backlash about the intensity and started this talk about a new rating and so forth. So, but I'm curious, 25 years hindsight, what is your take on Temple of Doom?
Well, I think it's an interesting film too. I think that because it was much different than the first one, and the third and fourth were more like the first one, I guess. But we remember it very fondly because it was a project having George and Steve Spielberg, doing it meant that we sat around with them and decided what we wanted to do, wrote it extremely fast, and Steve said great, and it was very easy. The complications did come when they decided to invent a new rating because kids were peeing in the theater seats. But so we remember the film fondly. I mean, everything about it was just joy.
If we really love things like plucking out the heart, I don't understand why people are so hostile about this.
Well, and I have my own theory, and my theory is that I think adults and parents in particular usually forget that when you're a kid, you relish gross-out stuff. And so once you become a parent, you kind of become protective, and you've outgrown kind of that gross-out stuff. And
no, that's true. It's absolutely true. Monkey brains and things for kids is the best,
I mean, that whole dinner. I mean, I remember, like I said, I'm 6 years old when that movie comes out, and my favorite sequence was the dinner sequence and the cave sequence with all the bugs. I mean, that's the centipede that goes in the bug that goes in her hair. I mean, every kid loved that. Every kid loved the heart scene just because it was so.
These are high points in cinema, obviously.
Yeah.
But I just don't think people, you write it, you're writing like a boy's adventure story.
Mm-hmm.
And what you say about them being sort of malevolent is true. They are, sort of gross and scary, and that's sort of the fun of it.
Yes.
So we were really shocked when we were, the victims of this backlash.